Has reading been redefined? Are reading expectations the same for children in 2015 as they were for children over 100 years ago? Is our society as literate as it once was? And should that be a concern? The following slides will cover some of these changes. Are these changes moving our society forward, or are they plummeting us back to a point in which we cannot recover? We will begin with the Bobbsey twins. The Bobbsey twin books were created by Edward Stratomer. The Stratomer Syndicate created many children's series books, including the Rover Boys, Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys, and Tom Swift. They were written by ghostwriters. Laura Lee Hope, for example, is a fictitious name, as is Carolyn Keene of the Nancy Drew books and Franklin Dixon of the Hardy Boys. In fact, Howard Garris of Uncle Wiggily fame wrote quite a few of the earlier Bobbsey twin books. But the history of the Bobbsey twins is not the focus of this presentation. These books have been revised, sometimes several times, and new Bobbsey twin books continue to be published. Since the Bobbsey twin books span 100+ years, they will help provide a picture of the decline in the reading abilities of our populace today. Dime novels and serial books were denounced by many parents and librarians in the early 1900s because they didn't consider these books as quality reading material to begin with. The first Bobbsey twin book was published in 1904 and was written by Edward Stratomer. According to James Keyline, an authority on children's serial books, volumes 2 and 3 were written by Lillian Garris, and Howard Garris was the main writer of the next 25 Bobbsey twin books. Keyline writes that, with the exception of a Bobbsey twins volume published in 1948, Garris's last syndicate volumes were published in 1935. These are two copies of Bobbsey twin books before the first revisions in 1950. The first Bobbsey twin book, The Bobbsey Twins or Merry Days Inside and Out, had 22 chapters and no pictures. There were 214 pages. There was a new preface to the 1950 edition. The fictitious Laura Lee Hope informs her readers that there was a great deal in the original edition of the book that they had probably never seen or heard about. She uses the example of a party that the twins were giving in which one of their friends was showing magic lantern slides. Magic lanterns belonged to the dark ages when people got about by horse and carriage or horse and cutter, and there were no such wonders as electric refrigerators or vacuum cleaners. She continues, "Before I made them," the changes, "I took up each change with my young neighbor. She gave her approval to each one of them." The 1950s revision has one less chapter, still no pictures, and contains only 176 pages, 38 pages less than the original. The 1961 edition changes the name to the Bobbsey Twins of Lakeport. There is not a preface in this new edition explaining any changes. Now there are only 18 chapters, 4 less than the original, and there are only 178 pages, minus the space taken up for one picture per chapter. In 1989, a new edition appeared of the Bobbsey Twins at Lakeport. This one is revised and abridged. Revised means that things are changed, and abridged means that things are cut out. There are only 12 chapters and 109 pages, minus the 8 pages of pictures. This 1989 version is less than half of the original and has a different storyline. It contains short, choppy sentences. And I do want to note that there are similar-looking red editions of this book that are reprints of the classic version. By classic, they mean the purple books from the 1960s. There were 30 of the new Bobbsey twin books written from 1987 to 1992. These are each around 90 pages or less. Michael Kernan, a Washington Post staff writer, wrote an article that appeared on September 5, 1987, called Keeping Up with the Bobbseys. He quotes from the brochure from Pocketbooks. The original 200-page books were too long for the music video generation. In 2005, the Bobbsey Twins' ready-to-read books were released. These books are for 3 to 5-year-olds and are 32 pages. They are recognizing words, word repetition, familiar words and phrases, simple sentences. And notice that understanding sounds is not a prerequisite for reading these books. It is word repetition related to corresponding pictures. Notice Dinah's dialect in the Bobbsey Twins at the Seashore in the pre-1950 edition. Dinah's dialect in the Bobbsey Twins' first book, pre-1950 edition. Keep in mind that the first Bobbsey Twin book was published 39 years after the end of the Civil War. In the 1950 edition, the dialect is removed. Was it removed due to racial stereotyping, or was it perhaps because children have been learning a new look-say method of reading since the 1930s, and they could no longer sound the dialect out to understand just what they were reading? Certainly, the length of a book has little to do with the reading level. But if the books were cut down due to children's shortened attention spans, and as the publishers admitted in the 1980s, and if the dialect was removed because children could no longer read it, we would have to admit that there is some sort of a problem. The changes were being made for some reason. Did young children read these books by themselves in the early 1900s, or were these books purchased by adults to read to their children? If these were meant to be read by adults to the children, why would it have been necessary to write the books on such easy reading levels? To answer these questions, we need to go back to the early 1900s when the Bobbsey Twins were written. Just what were children reading at the beginning of the 1900s when the Bobbsey series came on the scene? St. Nicholas was a popular children's monthly magazine from 1873 to 1940. Mary Mapes Dodge, who wrote Hans Brinker in the Silver Skates and Irvington stories, was the editor of St. Nicholas until her death in 1905. Here is a list of just some of the authors whose stories were published in St. Nicholas magazines: Louisa May Alcott, Lucretia Hale, Robert Louis Stevenson, Rudyard Kipling, Helen Hunt Jackson, Mark Twain, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Howard Pyle, Kate Douglas Wiggin, Frank Stockton, Frances Hodgson Burnett, and G.A. Henty. The first chapter of Little Lord Fauntleroy by Frances Hodgson Burnett appeared in the November 1885 issue of St. Nicholas. Each month, the child would get to read the next chapter until the book's completion. Burnett would later write A Little Princess in 1905 and The Secret Garden in 1911. I have a copy of the May 1899 St. Nicholas. It begins with the poem Little Susan Boudinot, daughter of Elias Boudinot, President of the Continental Congress, by Ethel Parton. It begins, Little Susan only 9, at the governor's to dine. Turkis locket, buff brocade, muslin tucker frilled and fine, far too fine to feel afraid in such elegance arrayed. With her round young eyes a-shine, sat up still and straight and staid. Little girls, as well she knew, should be seen, not listened to, in their elders' company, so her words were shy and few. But her smile shone sunnily on sir and madam grand to see, towering comb and powdered queue, ruffled chest and ribbon knee. Noting bow and bell in turn, much indeed she hoped to learn, till alack, the startled haste of the wakening came an urn by a pompous butler placed nigh the hostess, silvern, chaste, and fragrant. Tea that true folk spurn, tea, tax tea, she would not taste. And this is a lengthy poem, and I'll give you the spoiler. Little Susan curtsies low and proceeds to throw her tea out the window onto the flowers. And not only could the children read and appreciate this poem, it was assumed that they would have a good grasp of American history and already know that King George III had put a tax on our tea. The following is a small portion of a letter written by a young boy and published in the letterbox section of the May 1899 St. Nicholas. Dear St. Nicholas, last June I went to the western North Carolina mountains to a place called the Land of the Sky. Every morning you can see the clouds obscuring the tops of the mountains. I am 9 years old, and I've been reading St. Nicholas 4 years. My aunt gave it to me for my 5th birthday present. I remain your interested reader, Willard Conwell Tigg. Notice the clouds obscuring the tops of the mountains, and that he is 9 years old. He has been reading St. Nicholas since he was 5. I Googled his name and found this. Born 4th of August, 1889, death 28th of March, 1971, buried at St. James Cemetery in Marietta, Georgia. He said he was 9 years old, and this was May of 1899. He wouldn't have been 10 until August. He was living in Tennessee at the time he wrote this letter, and the gravestone says that he was born in Sweetwater, Tennessee. Sure sounds like it could be the very same Willard Conwell Tigg that wrote such an eloquent letter when he was just 9. A prize competition was announced in the April 1899 edition. 6 prizes would be awarded, paid in gold. The contest was announced in the April 1899 issue, and the winners were published in the July 1899 edition. The competitors were to submit lists of the best 25 books for young readers from 10 to 16 years of age. Here was the criteria. The books are to be works of fiction or general literature, excluding periodicals, religious works, reference books, or books purely of information, and such as may be considered of permanent value in a young folks' library, books to be read and reread. More than 4,000 children submitted lists. The following are almost all of the books mentioned from the combined list. Some books were selected by all or most of the prize winners. Ivanhoe was chosen by every one of them. You will notice that there are numbers after some of the book selections. These are the reading levels according to Accelerated Reader Today. I only added the reading levels if I could find the unabridged edition listed on their site. Sir Walter Scott seemed to be a favorite. Ivanhoe, Quentin Durward, Lady of the Lake, Kenilworth, Scott's Poems, and Tales of a Grandfather by Scott were chosen. 4 of Charles Dickens's books made the list. Christmas Stories, A Tale of Two Cities, David Copperfield, and The Old Curiosity Shop. The Last of the Mohicans, The Spy, The Deer Slayer, and The Pilot by James Fenimore Cooper were picked. And I will read these selections quickly. Pilgrim's Progress, Little Women, Uncle Remus, A Dog of Flanders. Nathaniel Hawthorne seemed to be very popular with the children. All 6 chose his Wonder Book. Additionally, they chose his Tanglewood Tales and Twice Told Tales. Kipling's First and Second Jungle Book and Captain's Courageous. Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. The only Twain book to make the list was The Prince and the Pauper. Stevenson's Child's Garden of Verses and Treasure Island. Swiss Family Robinson. Thackeray's The Rose and the Ring. Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Swift's Gulliver's Travels. Irving's Sketchbook. Kingsley's Water Babies and Westward Ho. And The Man Without a Country by Edward Everett Hale. Bulfinch's Age of Fable and Age of Chivalry, Arabian Nights, Stockton's Rudder Grange and the Floating Prince, Aesop's Fables, The Poems of Longfellow, Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare as well as his other works, Charles and Mary Lamb's Tales from Shakespeare, Ruskin's King of the Golden River, Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast, Bob's Son of Battle, The Caged Lion by Yonge, and Macaulay's Lays of Ancient Rome, Don Quixote, Thomas Hughes's Tom Brown at Rugby and Tom Brown's School Days, Heidi, Robin Hood, Grimm's Fairy Tales and Household Tales, Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Hans Brinker and the Silver Skates, and Hans Christian Andersen's Fairy Tales. The award committee wrote a lengthy explanation about reading itself and how the winners were chosen. It has been pleasant and enlightening to read the lists of youthful readers who enthusiastically endorse their selections as being what they like best. Youthful readers working unassisted could hardly make their choice on any other plan. But many children take to merely childish books most eagerly, just as they prefer sugar to bread and meat. Some sugar and some childish reading are good, but too much of either destroys a normal, healthy appetite for better food. It is not good for anyone to confine his reading to such works as express only, no matter how fallaciously, thoughts and feelings on his own level. We all need to read much that lifts us and shows us more than we would ever find out for ourselves. Children who have not been demoralized with too much literary sugar generally love to read many things that are beyond them. A special reason for giving to young readers books established among English classics is that it educates them in modes of feeling and expression other than those in fashion in their own little hour. When we are young, we are plastic and are easily moved to sympathize with many styles. And the man who in youth has never learned the accents of the masters of an earlier day is sadly apt to remain imprisoned in his own time to his lasting impoverishment. How often do children, and adults as well, read these books today? If you ask a child if they've read one of these classics we have just mentioned, they could surprise you and say, "Yes, I have." If you ask a few more questions, you just might see that there's a disconnect somewhere. Most likely, they have read an adapted, revised, or comic book form of the original classic. This is similar to a cliff note or a master plot summation. They know who the characters are and the plot, but little else. There are 9 books with the title A Tale of Two Cities on the Accelerated Reader site. These first 3 are retellings by Marion Layton, William Coleman, and Pauline Francis. The first 2 on this slide are also retellings by Karen Kelly and Lucinda Hawksley. Charles Dickens is given credit for the 3rd listing, which is a Saddleback edition. Notice the 3rd grade 6-month reading level. Really? For A Tale of Two Cities? Here is a page from this Saddleback edition. On this page, the first listing is an adaptation, the second is an abridged version, and the last one listed is an unabridged version by Dickens himself. Oh, and it's written on a 9th grade 7th month reading level. It's quite confusing. Do children really read these retellings, adaptations, and comic books and believe that they have read the works of Charles Dickens? How many children that read these sorts of things go on to read the real books? I once talked to a teenager who asked me for some reading recommendations. We were in a used bookstore and I caught sight of a copy of Swiss Family Robinson. I asked her if she had read that. She said she had, but she didn't like it. I asked her why, and she proceeded to tell me all about the book. I paused for a moment to take in what she had said. What she told me was so far removed from the true Swiss Family Robinson. What she had read was an author promoting his own environmental agenda under the guise of adapting the Swiss Family Robinson book. I doubt seriously if that girl will ever bother to read the original. I found this comment from a child's letter in the March 1899 St. Nicholas magazine. If I were wrecked on a desert island, Swiss Family Robinson would be my first book, as it is so full of valuable knowledge. There are so many letters in the St. Nicholas letterbox that attest to how much children appreciated this magazine. Many had received their subscriptions for many years. Here is one from 1898. And I get a great deal of valuable information from St. Nicholas, which I have had for 6 years, ever since I was 8 years old, and I do not think I could do without it, as it is read through from cover to cover. Sincerely yours, Lottie Hedstedt. The next slides show excerpts from other letters. This one is from 1886. Dear St. Nicholas, I am a little boy about 6 years old. I take the St. Nicholas and have taken it a long time. I can read the most of it. I am a little girl 10 years old. We have taken St. Nicholas for 7 years and have them all bound, and we read them more than any of our other books. You are the best book I have ever read. I am only a little boy 10 years old, but I love to read. I am 9. Your new continued story, Little Lord Fauntleroy, is very nice, and I always read it first. It is obvious that many of these children have been reading the magazine by themselves since very young. Other young children would have listened to older siblings or parents read these stories to them. We can conclude that many children were capable of reading Scott, Dickens, Cooper, Hawthorne, Shakespeare, and so many others, and enjoyed doing so. Adults had an appreciation for fine literature also, and were capable of reading these things to their children. The children had to have long attention spans, whether they were reading to themselves or listening to others read to them. They did not have televisions at the time of this contest. This is one page from the magazine in April of 1898. It is from a story by Frank Stockton. Now, let's revisit the Bobbsey twins. Do you see why some librarians and parents were concerned with these new serial books? Sugary children's books were already being published when the prize committee penned these insightful words. But many children take to merely childish books most eagerly, just as they prefer sugar to bread and meat. Some sugar and some childish reading are good, but too much of either destroys a normal, healthy appetite for better food. Next, we'll take a look at a children's book series beginning in the 1940s. Most of you are probably familiar with The Boxcar Children by Gertrude Chandler Warner. She only wrote the first 19 Boxcar Children books, by the way. You will notice that the rest of the series does not say by Gertrude Chandler Warner, but created by. There are 139 in the regular series presently. Warner, a school teacher, wrote the first book, The Boxcar Children, in 1924. It was revised in 1942. Surprise Island followed in 1949. The old hardback copy of Surprise Island included about this book pages at the end of the story. It says, to facilitate comprehension, concepts and vocabulary have been controlled. Containing fewer than 800 different words with their derivatives and variants which have been selected because of their familiarity to children and their usefulness in telling the story, this book has a smaller vocabulary load than many second-grade readers. With the exception of a few proper names, all words are used 3 or more times. About 25 words which are absolutely essential to the story, such as quahog, skeleton, library, collection, onions, and explore, are above third-grade reading level. The meaning of each of these 25 words is explained either by context or in an illustration. The following 4 screens show the number of times these special words were repeated in the text, and I could have overlooked some. The word explore and its variations are used 17 times. These are the page numbers that those words appear on. Onions is used 7 times, library is mentioned 5 times, and skeleton is used 7 times. Quahog is repeated 3 times on the same page. The words are explained either by context or in an illustration. Sometimes they use these quahog shells for the purple part. Quahogs are clams. Yes, and I think they dried clams here too, replied Joe, looking at some unbroken quahog shells. The 1949 edition states that this book has a smaller vocabulary load than many second grade readers. Today, this book is listed by Accelerated Reader for those who can read on a fourth grade second month reading level. Perhaps the computer program that calculates these levels didn't consider that the above level words were explained either by context or in a picture. Accelerated Reader lists all the Boxcar Children books for a lower grade interest level. The Scott Forsman 1963 edition of The Lighthouse Mystery says this: "The following original or adapted stories provide controlled reading ease and a high interest level to appeal to middle graders." In 1949, a second grader should have had the skills to read this. Today, it is listed at a fourth grade, second month reading level. Still too difficult to master the reading skills? In our land of opportunity, in which any and all things, including book mastery, has to be equalized for all, we now have Boxcar Children available in comic book form. These are not labeled as comic books, of course. They are called graphic novels. This comic book version of Surprise Island is listed at a second grade 8th month reading level. This is one page from the graphic novel edition of Surprise Island. I will read the first page. The first surprise. The four Alden children, Henry, Jessie, Violet, and Benny, run all the way home. Their grandfather, Mr. Alden, had promised them a surprise. "School is out for the whole summer. You said you'd tell us the minute school was out." "Was this the day I said I'd tell you?" "Once upon a time, my father bought an island." "He bought one?" "Yes, a small one. If you want to stay there all summer, you may." Mr. Alden drove them to the ocean. Dr. Moore and his mother come along to enjoy the fun. Captain Daniel will take us in the motorboat across to the island. Number of words in the 1949 edition, 22,923. Number of words in the graphic novel, 2,916. That's only 20,007 fewer words. The number of words are reduced by 87%. I went to the Accelerated Reader site and I did an advanced search. Here was the criteria I entered. Grade levels, first grade 0 month to 13.5. That's college level. Topic, graphic novels, all subtopics, fiction and nonfiction, English only. I individually selected lower grades, middle grades plus, and upper grades. The following slides show the total number of books in each category, followed by the number of graphic novels. I have included the percentage of graphic novel books in each category also. This is March the 13th, 2015, and it will be interesting to see if the percentages increase in the next few years. In the lower grades, you will see that there are just shy of 1% of books that are graphic novels. In the middle grades, it's 3.5%. Middle grades plus has almost 4%, while the upper grades have 1%. I don't wish to make the focal point of this discussion graphic novels. However, I will add slides showing just a few of the books that have been published in graphic novel form. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea unabridged version is written on a 10th grade 0 month reading level and has 138,138 words. The graphic novel edition is written on a 3rd grade 0 month reading level and has 2,859 words. Darwin's Original Origin of the Species has 154,892 words, while the graphic novel has only 21,408. There are 133,484 less words in the graphic novel format, and yet this graphic novel edition is still listed as being on an Accelerated Reader 10th grade 3rd month reading level. I guess the graphic novel author left in all of the classification terms, but took out all of the might have, could have, and probablys. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer contains 68,079 words and is written on an 8th grade first month reading level. There are at least 2 graphic novels of Tom Sawyer, one on a 2nd grade 4th month reading level and one on a 3rd grade 8th month. The graphic novel edition of Huckleberry Finn has a mere 11,941 words, while the original Twain version has 105,590. When there are so many adaptations, abridgments, revisions, and now graphic novels available instead of the real book, it's very easy for the reader to be unaware of just who really wrote the work. For example, there are 15 listings with the title of Oliver Twist by various authors. Will the real author of Oliver Twist please stand up? How did we get to this point? You're probably all familiar with Dr. Seuss and the Cat in the Hat. My 1957 copy has the outline of the cat on the back page and gives a little background history. It reads as follows. It can be read by children who are still in the early stages of learning to read. Dr. Seuss has used only 223 different words, of which at least half should be familiar words to first grade pupils who have finished the primer in any one of the most popular Basel reading series. Furthermore, the rhythm, rhyme, and strong interest pull of the story itself will assist young readers in identifying words they meet which they have not seen in type before. Dr. Seuss's publisher supplied him with the sight vocabulary list of 223 words, one that was in harmony with the words the child would be learning in school. He would be using a controlled vocabulary list. Samuel Blumenfeld states the following in his Homeschooling, A Parent's Guide to Teaching Children from 1998. The Dr. Seuss books were written to enable the preschool child to develop a sight vocabulary as a prelude to being taught to read in the whole word method. This was confirmed by Seuss himself in an interview in Arizona Magazine in 1981. Because his books were so simple, many people assumed that they were easy to write. He said, "They think I did it in 20 minutes. That blanked Cat in the Hat took 9 months until I was satisfied. I did it for a textbook house, and they sent me a word list. That was due to the Dewey Revolt in the 20s, in which they threw out phonic reading and went to word recognition as if you're reading a Chinese pictograph instead of blending sounds of different letters. I think killing phonics was one of the greatest causes of illiteracy in this country. Anyway, they had it all worked out. A healthy child at the age of 4 can learn so many words in a week, and that's all." So there were 223 words to use in this book. I read the list 3 times and I almost went out of my head. I said I'll read it once more, and if I can find 2 words that rhyme, that'll be the title of my book. I found cat and hat, and I said the title will be The Cat in the Hat. And remember the boxcar, children? To facilitate comprehension, concepts and vocabulary have been controlled. That's the reason that the original Boxcar Children book from 1924 was completely rewritten in 1942. The 1924 Boxcar Children didn't use the controlled vocabulary that would be necessary as the new look-say readers came on the scene. The 1924 edition was written using the vocabulary words shown. Words such as harmonious, vigorously, enameled, rapturous, and delicatessen. For a contrast, we'll examine the first paragraph from the 1924 edition and then from the 1950 Scott Forsman edition I have. 1924. About 7 o'clock one hot summer evening, a strange family moved into the little village of Middlesex. Nobody knew where they came from or who they were. But the neighbors soon made up their minds what they thought of the strangers, for the father was very drunk. He could hardly walk up the rickety front steps of the old tumble-down house, and his 13-year-old son had to help him. Toward 8 o'clock, a pretty, capable-looking girl of 12 came out of the house and bought a loaf of bread at the baker's. And that was all the villagers learned about the newcomers that night. 1950 edition. One warm night, 4 children stood in front of a bakery. No one knew them. No one knew where they had come from. Even the names were changed. Grandfather Alden and the Alden children were Cordyces in the 1924 version. Dr. Moore was previously Dr. McAllister. Tip and Mitten were the first 2 pre-primers that I had in first grade in 1965. The Big Show was the third, followed by 2 hardback readers, Jack and Janet and Up and Away. These 5 books completed my first grade reading course. The copies I am showing are the 4th edition. The one in use when I started school was most likely the 3rd edition. Let's take a look at the Tip book. There are 64 pages counting these 2 vocabulary list pages. There are 622 words, but only 20 different words are used. This is called controlled vocabulary. Notice that the dog's name Tip is repeated 60 times in the book. Here is repeated 49 times and play 47. Just the 3 words tip, hear, and play make up 25% of the 622 words in this book. Come, hear, tip, and play are used 3 times each on this page. Well, what does the teacher's manual say? This exercise will demonstrate to pupils that they will ordinarily not need to use letter-sound associations for the vowels in unlocking strange printed words. Let me repeat that. Ordinarily, you don't need to know the sounds that vowels make to read a strange word. Let's think about that a minute. Pat, pet, pit, pot, put. What would it take to read these words if you didn't know any of the sounds for the vowels? Let's see. How about pictures? A picture of a pot on a stove would do nicely for P-O-T, and P-E-T would go nicely with the picture of a pet shop. And then, of course, there's always the what word makes sense in the sentence trick. Let's see if I'm correct. Page 32. Pupils will learn that the sense of the context in which a word appears indicates the sound that the vowel in that word stands for. I have told you that you can usually tell what a new word is by using just the sounds of the consonants stand for to help you think of a word that makes sense with the other words. Could this be true? Was learning the sounds of vowels unnecessary in first grade? Page 3 of the teacher's manual. Since vowel sound associations are comparatively unreliable and generally unnecessary clues to the identity of a strange printed word, these are introduced only in the 2nd grade materials at a time when pupils will already have a firm mastery of the basic word attack technique. Page 5 of the manual. Note that we do not expect you to tell pupils what the new words are. Instead, we show you how to lead pupils to unlock by themselves practically every new word in the primary program by using the sense of the context together with their knowledge of the sounds that letters stand for, because they expect the children to know the consonant sounds. There is an author's note on page 16 that is critical to the teaching of tip. In fact, it basically serves as a warning. Even though you need not, of course, follow the suggested wording exactly, you should realize that this material has been carefully prepared to avoid confusing the pupils. Consequently, you should think twice before making any major change in the instructional language we have recommended. Now, I'm going to read this word per word. Show and point to the picture on page 1. What is this a picture of? What color is the dog's tail? What part of it is white? Point to the word tip. This word under the picture is the name of the first story in this book. It is also the dog's name. The children who own the dog thought of that name when they noticed the little part of the dog's tail that is white. It continues. Let's find out what the word is. It's a word you've heard many times. What is the first letter in this word? What is the last letter? You know the sound that T stands for. I'm going to say something and leave out this word at the end. When I stop, decide what word would make sense there that begins with the sound T stands for and ends with the sound P stands for. Listen. Not all of the dog's tail is brown. It's white at the... What is the word? How do you know it isn't end? How do you know it isn't tap or type? Stop. How would the child have figured out for himself that the name of the book is the name of the end of a dog's tail? How would one conclude that on their own? Oh, I know. The teacher followed the steps exactly and told them. Show and point to the picture on page 1. What is this a picture of? What color is the dog's tail? What part of it is white? The name of the story is the dog's name. The children thought of the name when they saw that the end of his tail was white. Without this lead-in, would the child really have figured this out for himself? Also, some children learned how to read before they came to school, and there's a good chance that someone shouted out the name when the teacher first asked the question. Point to the word tip again. What is the letter in the middle of this word? The letter I is one of the 5 letters that we call vowels. Print the letters A, E, I, O, and U on the board. Here are the 5 vowels. What are their names? All other letters like T and P we call consonants. Each of the consonants usually stands for just one sound. You have learned which sound each one usually stands for. Each of the vowels may stand for several different sounds or for no sound at all. But you don't need to know about the different vowel sounds now. If you use just the sounds that the consonants stand for and the meanings of the other words, you will almost always be able to tell what a new word is when you meet it in your reading. The manual continues by teaching the child the word no. Never fear. If the teacher follows the manual as she is supposed to, she is prepared with a sentence clue. These lines tell what someone might say if he were trying to get the dog in our story to stop doing something. Now, beginning at the bottom of page 20 of the manual, point to the words tip and no. Did you notice that you figured out these words by yourself? I didn't have to tell you what they are. You have found out now that you can read printed words by using the sounds you know the consonants stand for to help you think of a word that makes sense with the other words. Page 24 contains some important instructions for the children. Before you begin to read the first story, I have something else to tell you. In this book, the pictures on each page tell what is happening in the story, and the words tell what the people in the story say. This means that you will have to look carefully at each picture to see what is happening in it. If you don't, you may miss something important in the story. Often, what you see in the pictures will help you decide what the words mean. Now, I'll repeat the instructions from page 32. This exercise will demonstrate to pupils that they will ordinarily not need to use letter-sound associations for the vowels in unlocking strange printed words. Pupils will learn that the sense of the context in which a word appears indicates the sound that the vowel in that word stands for. The text continues. I am going to make believe I have put a vowel in the blank space on the board to make a word. Then I'm going to say something, and at the end, I'm going to leave out that word. You won't see the vowel in the word, but I'm sure you'll be able to tell me what the word is. Now listen. I ate so much that I felt too... Who knows what the word is? You didn't really need to see any vowel to figure out what the word must be, did you? How did you know the word wasn't fall? How did you know it wasn't fell? Notice that the other words I said told you what sound the missing vowel stood for. You didn't even need to see the vowel. So, as long as you have a picture or sentences with enough contextual clues, the child can determine that HOT means hot, or BALL is ball, or the word FULL is full. Or if pictures aren't enough to teach reading, how about word repetition? Here is a list of all 20 words from the tip book and the number of times that they are repeated. Was this a new idea when I started school in the 1960s? Hardly. Here is an Elson reader from Scott Forsman in 1930. It was first published in 1927, and this book was about Dick and Jane. The numbers after the word note how many times the word was repeated in the book. This screen shows a comparison between the two pre-primers. 68 different words were introduced in the 40-page Elson pre-primer, while only 20 different words were presented in the 64-page tip pre-primer. This is a Peter and Peggy reader from Macmillan in 1937. Notice the controlled vocabulary list. Read Another Story was published by the Benjamin Sanborn and Company. This reader gives some helpful information in the back. These 172 basic words used in Read Another Story were checked with the vocabulary of 8 recent basic primers having copyright dates since 1935. Jim and Judy was published by Macmillan in 1939. Goodbye is repeated 7 times on the last page of this story. Goodbye is listed as a new word introduced in this Jim and Judy book. It wasn't introduced until the very last page of the story. Will seeing it in print 7 times on one page be enough to remember this word forevermore? Trails in the Woods from 1940 was used when my father was a young boy. This book is read after Unit 5 of the 3rd reader. Notice the simple short vowel words such as trip, west, act, and wren. Fun with Dick and Jane was published by Scott Forsman. There were 3 pre-primers before this book, and by the time the children finished this one, they would be able to recognize 158 words altogether. The story rode from the John C. Winston Company, and the publisher's selling point was the book can be read with ease because of the unusual control of vocabulary. In fact, if the students memorized all the words in this series, they would be able to recognize 640 words by the end of 2nd grade. My student dictionary has 77,000 entries, while the 2nd edition of the Oxford English Dictionary has 616,500. Comparing the number of words learned by the end of 2nd grade to the entries in a children's dictionary, the child has a mere 76,360 words to go. These are my little red, green, and blue storybooks from Ginn and Company in 1953. There were 21 words introduced in the 48-page red book. Airplane is one of the first 21 words learned. The word up is not mastered until the 3rd book, the blue one. Ginn and Company published Under the Apple Tree in the 1950s. This Alice and Jerry book is from 1948. There was a previous edition from 1939. On the last page it says, "Special acknowledgement is accorded the following authors who generously furnished textbook rights on original stories from which ideas were taken and adaptations were made." You see, the stories had to be adapted to fit the controlled vocabulary, just like the 1924 edition of the Boxcar Children had to be rewritten to coincide with the word lists. Math, geography, and other textbooks would have been rewritten also. I've often wondered why there wasn't more of an outcry from parents when children's reading capabilities suddenly plummeted. These are just some of my thoughts on the subject. First of all, when this look-say controlled vocabulary first came on the scene, most teachers who were already teaching may have had to use the newer reading sets, but they still understood and taught phonetic rules. As the newer teachers came on the scene and the older ones retired, the children learned less phonics and more word guessing. In the 1930s, when the look-say method became widespread, our country was in the midst of a Great Depression. Many fathers and mothers were more concerned with putting food on the table than with looking closely at school curricula. Most likely, they had no idea that such radical changes were taking place in the schoolhouse. From December of 1941 to 1945, our country was embroiled in World War II. Fathers, sons, brothers, and uncles, and some women also, were now absent from home, fighting on another continent. Many lost their lives during this war. Mothers went to work outside of the home, often for the first time, and when they came home from their factory jobs, they still had to clean, cook, do laundry, as well as many of the husbands' responsibilities. They were probably just too tired to pay attention. By the 1950s, things were settling back down on the home front, and suddenly there was an outcry when parents began to notice that their children couldn't read. Rudolph Flesch wrote Why Johnny Can't Read in 1955. Flesch wrote, "The teaching of reading in the United States flies in the face of all logic and common sense." The foreword to this edition of the book was written by Edward Ziegler and was originally published in Reader's Digest in 1985. I will quote from this. "What I suggested," Flesch said recently, "was very simple. Go back to the ABCs. Teach children the 44 sounds of English and how they are spelled. Then they can sound out each word from left to right and read it off the page." What he advocated has come to be known as phonics first instruction. As Flesch explains it, with phonics first, you teach a child to read the word fish by telling him about the sounds of F, I, and SH, sh. Then you tell him to blend the sounds from left to right to read the word fish. To teach the word by the look and say system, you give the child a picture of a fish with fish printed underneath, and you encourage him to memorize the group of letters that make up fish. Then you print the word again and again, and hope the child will remember what the word fish looks like and what it means. You do the same thing, more or less, with the many thousands of other English words. Most such instruction, Flesch insists, is not reading, but word guessing. Flesch blames the look and say method for our alarming decline in literacy. Was Flesch's warning heeded? I guess not. I had the tip Reading for Meaning series in the mid-60s. I found an ad on eBay selling a creative learning for kids product. Let's break this down. The child traces the word find that is already written on the page. Next, they write the words on the lines. And there are 3 groups of boxes shown next. The child has to select the boxes that the word find would fit in. Last of all, the child circles which word is find from the following choices: funny, find, and blue. First, we have to ask some simple questions. Did someone already tell the child that the word F-I-N-D is find? You would have to assume so, because if the child already could read the word find, this exercise would be unnecessary. Obviously, this exercise is intended to instill in the child the shape of the word find so that they will be able to recognize it when they see it in the controlled vocabulary books or pages they will be reading. On a side note, what happens if someone writes this word in cursive? Will that throw the reader off since the shape has changed? Is word shape used to teach word recognition in addition to a picture and contextual clues? Personally, I thought this was absurd. I sent it to a friend who sent it to one of her friends that is a teacher. I will read parts of her response. I am a certified teacher in Texas with an additional certification for teaching reading from the University of Texas School of Education, graduated cum laude. Therefore, I am qualified to assess the activity mentioned below. The activity below is not inappropriate for a first grader if used in conjunction with other curriculum activities and supportive activities during the week that the student is learning the word find. The week they learn the word find? Looking at a teaching activity without reviewing the entire curriculum for the week or the month or the semester, and doing so without a teaching degree or a reading specialization, can be counterproductive. So, we're not qualified to examine these types of exercises. She continues, unless a person has knowledge, training, and experience in the myriad of ways that children learn, it would be easy to criticize this activity and many other activities as well. The way students learn varies widely from child to child. All of those ways have to be addressed with each word that each child learns. She's the highly qualified one in these matters, and she just told you that a child learns one word at a time. Some students would gain nothing from this activity, she says. Others would learn the word find and know it after completing this activity, and still others would gain from it only after completing it in conjunction with other learning activities. I caution against criticism that is not based on an educated understanding of what methods are appropriate for causing a child to learn. And she closes with this, I hope you will share my comments with others. Well, I Googled word shapes. You can see that there are a lot of sites. I found a Frank Schaeffer's publications, Basics First, Vocabulary Development for Fourth Graders. The page on the screen is from that booklet. In the top right-hand corner, it says Word Configuration. The instructions are to write the words from the box in the spaces. Use the shape of the letters to help you. My question is this: could a child who cannot read at all make 100% on this vocabulary development exercise? There are 10 words. I've rearranged them on the screen with the number of letters in each word. The first question has 7 squares. There are 3 7-letter words. Habitat and species have letters that go above or below the line, so reunion is the only possibility. There are only 1 each of the 4, 8, and 10-letter answers, so they're easy. 6 to go. There are 2 11-letter words, 2 7, and 2 6 left, and each of those words can only fit into one picture. I guess the non-reader and the reader have an equal opportunity to get a perfect grade. These are Dolch sight words from the Mr. Printables site. Dolch sight words are a compilation of the most frequently used words in children's books. Gradually, a child is able to recognize simple words, then short sentences, and so read simple stories in books. Well, it is just magical. We've created neat flashcards containing all 220 service words and 95 common nouns to use for word activities. Mrs. Perkins' Dolch word site explains this further. Dolch compiled the list based on words used in children's reading books in the 30s and 40s. The list contains 220 service words that must be quickly recognized in order to achieve reading fluency. Sight words make up 50 to 70% of any general text. Therefore, teaching the Dolch word list is a crucial goal of education in grades kindergarten through 3. Mrs. Perkins continues. Many of the 220 Dolch words cannot be sounded out and have to be learned by sight that is memorized. Repetition and practice are very important in making recognition of sight words automatic. So what are sight words? Many of the most frequently used words in English are difficult to sound out and instead need to be recognized on sight for a child to become a proficient reader. Sight words can be known by other names as well, including high-frequency words, Dolch words, Fry words, named after Dr. Edward B. Fry, who updated this list in '96, instant words, star words, and more. And this came from Mrs. Perkins' site. Wikipedia chimes in with, these lists of words are still assigned for memorization in American elementary schools. Although most of the 220 Dolch words are phonetic, children are sometimes told that they can't be sounded out and they have to be learned by sight, hence the alternative term sight word. The list is divided according to the grades in which it was intended that children would memorize these words. So, Mrs. Perkins says that many of the Dolch words cannot be sounded out, and the Wikipedia site says that most of the words on the list are phonetic. Are children supposed to learn these by sight or by reading the words phonetically? Well, it's interesting that it is introduced in the pre-primer, but sit is not introduced until second grade. If the child was taught to sound out it, which would be considered a regular letter sound word, would he not be also reading bit, fit, hit, lit, pit, and sit? Obviously not, because sit is introduced as a sight word in second grade. The same could be said for the word and. If the children were taught to sound this out, they would also be able to sound out band, hand, land, sand, and gland. By simply learning the phonics rule about a Y sounding like a long E at the end of a word, the child could also read candy, dandy, handy, mandy, randy, and sandy. In should also be able to be sounded out, and then the child could easily add bin, fin, kin, pin, sin, tin, and win to his vocabulary. Blue, admittedly, is considered irregular. However, a child who has learned the rule that UE sounds like a long U would not have to learn this by word recognition or word shape. 44 words are spelled this way, including true, sue, clue, cue, hue, rescue, tissue, value, avenue, and argue. Find is the only word in the IND family on the list. This is good news for kids struggling with their word configurations or word shape exercises. Find, bind, kind, and hind would all have the same word shape, which could be a tad confusing. We hear of the importance of reading continually. Parents want their children to be able to read. Now we have programs that promise to teach your baby to read. Not your toddler, your baby. How do they intend to accomplish this? Look at the word cards. You see the letters that spell the word elephant, and you slide open the card and you see the picture of an elephant. Show this enough times and your baby can point to the right association. They also have a DVD. How is this any different than seeing Tip the dog in print 60 times with accompanying pictures? This next book is called Peanut Butter and Jelly by Joanne Nelson from Modern Curriculum Press. The schools could purchase the student books along with the audio cassettes. But peanut butter and jelly is my favorite thing to eat is repeated 9 times and is modified the 10th time to it was peanut butter and jelly, my favorite thing to eat. There are only 107 words other than the peanut butter and jelly statements. The book is 24 pages long. I'm sure following along with the cassette is helpful in memorizing this special book. It's Too Windy from Scholastic is considered a Level 1 reader. Level 1. Short sentences and stories made up of words kids can sound out using their phonics skills and words that are important to remember. Really? I know how to stop this rolling stroller. Know how to stop rolling stroller. Do you really think the child in this Level 1 reader has learned all of the rules for the sounds of O, let alone the silent K in KNOW? This is a Level 4 Hello reader. This is intended for grades 2 and 3, ages 7 to 9. And the opening note to parents is written by Priscilla Lynch, Ph.D., New York University educational consultant. If your child is learning to read and asks for a word, give it immediately so that the meaning of the story is not interrupted. Do not ask your child to sound out the word. On the other hand, if your child initiates the act of sounding out, don't intervene. If your child is reading along and makes what is called a miscue, listen for the sense of the miscue. If the word road is substituted for the word street, for instance, no meaning is lost. Don't stop the reading for a correction. Well, you can call substituting road for street a miscue or anything you want to call it, but it will never change the fact that the child is not reading. He's trying to remember a word he was taught to guess. Notice that the back of this book has a box with Scott Forsman Phonics System, Grade 1, Phonics Reader 6. So what do they mean by phonics? The word queen is joined with a picture of a queen. Zebra word, zebra picture. Yo-yo word, yo-yo picture. This is where some of the confusion comes in. Parents ask if the teacher is teaching phonics. Well, indeed they are, but their definition and understanding of just what phonics is differs from what Rudolph Flesch so aptly explained 60 years ago. With phonics first, you teach a child to read the word fish by telling him about the sounds of F, I, and SH. Then you tell him to blend the sounds from left to right to read the word fish. To teach the word by the look and say system, you give the child a picture of a fish with fish printed underneath, and you encourage him to memorize the group of letters that make up fish. Meet the Little Engine That Could is a pre-level 1 for ages 4 to 6 from the Grosset and Dunlap All Aboard reading series. There are also picture readers for ages 3 to 6. Picture readers have super simple text with many nouns appearing as rebus pictures. At the end of each book are 24 flashcards. On one side is the rebus picture, on the other side is the written out word. Spot's Big Book of Words by Eric Hill, published by Putnam, contains numerous pictures with the word or words accompanying each picture. Cereal, milk pitcher, bread knife, fork, and margarine to name a few. There are over 30 words with accompanying pictures on the first oversized 2-page spread. There are 2 sentences to master made up of 23 words in which some of these new words are used. Wheels is from the early Step Into Reading series from Random House. Their note to parents. Early Step Into Reading books are designed for preschoolers and kindergartners who are just getting ready to read. The words are easy, the type is big, and the stories are packed with rhyme, rhythm, and repetition. We suggest that you read this book to your child the first few times, pointing to each word as you go. Soon your child will start saying the words with you, and before long, he or she will try to read the story alone. Don't be surprised if your child uses the pictures to figure out the text. That's what they're there for. The important thing is to develop your child's confidence and to show your child that reading is fun. So, you read this a few times to your child, pointing to the words as you go, and then they repeat it back to you, with the help of the accompanying pictures, of course. Igloo Books publishes an I Can Read series in which the adult reads the left-hand side and the child reads the right-hand side, which includes a simple sentence taken from the story on the left-hand side, which the child reads. Firstly, it's always helpful to read the whole book to your child, stopping to talk about the pictures. Explain that you're going to read it again, and this time the child can join in. Read the left-hand page. When you come to the sentence which is repeated on the opposite page, run your finger under this. Your child can then try to read the sentence. Searching for the child's sentence in the adult version is a useful activity. Your child will have a real sense of achievement when all the sentences on the right-hand page can be read. Giving lots of praise is very important. So instead of just identifying a word and matching it with the word on the other page, the child is matching a complete sentence to the same sentence on the other page. This is another Scholastic Hello Reader Level 1. This one doesn't even address parents. It's, "Hello, family members." Before, look at the cover and pictures and have your child predict what the story is about. Read the story to your child. Encourage your child to chime in with familiar words and phrases. Echo read with your child by reading a line first and having your child read it after you do. I have to admit that I'm more concerned about the family member who really believes that the child is now reading when the child merely repeated what was read to him. Bruce Dietrich Price sums this up quite nicely in his article "The Con Continues" in the American Thinker on June 20th, 2014. Whole word experts have invented numerous gimmicks that let such children fake it. They do a picture walk, a pre-read, and a paragraph-by-paragraph discussion of what might be in the book. By the time the child comes to read the book, he can answer questions about meaning. And if he can extract meaning, then according to these experts, he can read. What a con! I still have an article that Mona Sharin wrote 25 years ago. She quotes Henry Adams. Listening to the graceful, articulate, and flowing words of ordinary people culled from diaries and letters of the Civil War era and comparing them to the flat, ungrammatical, and awkward language that characterizes our own time is enough to prompt doubts about American progress. She quotes a Civil War private's eloquent description of his hospital ward and follows with this: "Everyone, from generals to journalists to slaves, seemed to have a firmer grasp on the English language than most moderns can claim. As for the English language, surely no more difficult for our kids to learn than for the children of slaves. The Southern Regional Educational Board reports that at most colleges, 1/3 of freshmen require remedial work. The Motorola Company reports that only 20% of the adults who take its 7th grade level English composition test pass." Sharin closes by saying, "There's a great deal to mourn about the Civil War era. The carnage was simply stupefying. Yet hearing it told in such glowing words by such ordinary people reminds us that there is much to mourn in what we have lost since." Sharin is correct in her assessment. We've already shown that children were reading Dickens, Sir Walter Scott, Defoe, and Thackeray in the late 1800s. The first paragraph of Dickens' David Copperfield, published in 1850, reads as follows: "Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. To begin my life with the beginning of my life, I record that I was born, as I have been informed and believe, on a Friday at 12 o'clock at night. It was remarked that the clock began to strike and I began to cry simultaneously." Now we have the great illustrated classic that begins, "I was born on a Friday at 12 o'clock at night. The clock began to strike and I began to cry at the same time." The latter is just not Dickens. Unless that great illustrated classic be too rigorous for some, a graphic novel version is available. Let's look at Melville's Moby Dick. "Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse and nothing in particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos gets such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. I quietly take to the ship. There's nothing surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men in their degree sometime or other cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me. The Great Illustrated Classic only requires a 5th grade 3rd month reading level and reads as follows. Call me Ishmael. I am a schoolmaster, and whenever life got me down, I would leave my job and head for one special place. When my spirits needed restoring, I could always count on the sea. And once again, a graphic novel is available. Amazon lists this graphic novel for kids 8 to 12 years and in grades 3rd through 7th. The unabridged copy of Moby Dick has 206,052 words. The Great Illustrated Classic copy has 16,217. The graphic novel has 7,433 words. A quick glance at these newer copies may acquaint one with the plot. However, Herman Melville is missing. What has happened to Dickens' Tale of Two Cities? It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. The Great Illustrated Classic briefly explains the history of the time period and omits the memorable, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The graphic novel edition is for kids 12 and up, 7th grade and up. Accelerated Reader lists this as a 3rd grade 6-month reading level. A comic book written at a 3rd grade 6-month reading level for our children 12 and up? You can also buy this book in a set that includes the study guide as well as an audio CD that reads this book aloud, word per word. By the way, this word per word audio is 30 to 40 minutes long. The unabridged CD of A Tale of Two Cities is 13 and a half hours long. Somehow, this just isn't Dickens. The 2012 edition of What Kids Are Reading, The Book Reading Habits of Students in American Schools report by Renaissance Learning, Accelerated Reader, lists the 40 top read graphic novels by 9th to 12th grade readers. This list consists of the totals gathered from 24,265 schools nationwide that use the Accelerated Reader program. Of these top 40 graphic novels read by 9th to 12th graders, the 9 listed on the chart are considered classics. There's some questions we should ask. Number 1, were the children assigned the unabridged version but read the comic book edition instead? Or were at least some of these high schoolers assigned the Saddleback graphic novel to begin with? Or 3, did they just choose to read a comic book version of these classics just for the fun of it? The top row for each listing shows the interest level of the comic book edition, the reading level, and finally the number of words. Beneath are the levels and words for the unabridged version. For example, the Saddleback version of A Tale of Two Cities is listed for middle graders and is written on a 3rd grade 6-month reading level. There are 5,171 words in this book. The unabridged Tale of Two Cities is written for upper graders at a 9th grade 7th month reading level and has 136,420 words. Controlled vocabularies. adaptations, graphic novels, prediction, picture walks, word shapes, word configurations, guided reading, echo reading, sight reading. Has reading been redefined? I'll close with this quote from Samuel Blumenfeld. We live at a time when survival requires an astute intelligence that enables us not only to read books and magazines, but also the handwriting on the wall. There is more misinformation and disinformation being diffused throughout the world today than ever before, and a well-educated person should be able to dig out the truth under a mountain of lies. One might even say that the ultimate aim of education should be not only to enable an individual to discern the truth, but to make the individual want to know the truth and dig for it when necessary.